Good morning, friends. We will continue our discussion of power, the writings of Karl Marx, and we will begin from our next point, that is P. We had already covered point O, and now we are coming to point P. This is based on page 111, Economic and Philosophical Manuscript 1844. Karl Marx says that the worker's labor becomes an external quality, not something which comes from his or her inner life. The worker is alienated from the activity of working itself. It is a matter of fulfilling another's desires or another person's desires. The work becomes a burden. For Marx, this is the permanent condition of capitalist mode of production or capitalism as a system. I am quoting him in direct narration now. As a result of this permanent condition of capitalist mode of production, man, the worker, only feels himself freely active in his animal functions, eating, drinking, procreating, or at most in his dwelling and in dressing up, etc. And in his human functions, he no longer feels himself to be anything but an animal. What is animal becomes human, and what is human becomes animal. Quotation ends. Now, this paragraph is the foundation of Theodore Adorno's concept of culture industry in late capitalism. The concept of late capitalism was introduced in social science literature by Ernst Mendel and Frederick Jameson, another postmodern thinker of Marxist pedigree, calls postmodernism as the culture logic of or cultural logic of late capitalism. In other words, Karl Marx said that once the worker is alienated from his work or his product, when the work is not part of the inner calling of the worker, rather, he is forced to sell his labor as an object in the market dominated by the capitalist or the ruling class. There are two social implications of this alienation. One is the consequence which is felt at the level of the worker himself. Instead of a man as a representative of human species, the labor class or the worker is forced to live a life of the animal, and he restricts himself to only eating, drinking, procreating. These three things are common in animals as well as among human beings, or at most in his dwelling and in dressing up, etc. Now, these two things are part of popular culture created by the culture industry, and this popular culture of alienated human beings give rise to what C. Wright Mills calls as mass society. And the culture of this mass society is called popular culture, but this popular culture is understood within two rubric: the ideology of consumerism and hedonism. Therefore, the concept of human power in Marx within the theory of alienation has given rise to critical thought associated with the Frankfurt School in Germany, and critical theory the world over, including critical theory of C. Wright Mills of United States of America. Now let us come to point Q. Since labor or work component and transformation of the natural world is a defining aspect of our species being, and we are alienated from the species and from our co-workers. We cannot recognize ourselves in those around us. We do not see fellow humans, but we do not see fellow human beings who might be competing with us for jobs and scarce resources. We see our fellow beings as people who are potential threats in our endeavor, in our attempt to find jobs and buy scarce resources. And then there is a conclusion in the economic and philosophic manuscript of 1844, which presents some sort of Marxist idealism in contrast to the concept of free market in the writings of political opponents of Karl Marx, namely the champions of liberal democracy and free market. We can summarize the Marxist position about the free market in the continuation of our discussion of human power in the theory of alienation, which we have summarized from point A to Q. The last section R after Q R, the vision of a free and unalienated world in which people can work together in cooperation to improve their lives and develop their culture. Marx identifies this with the political and economic emancipation of wage labor. Private property and wages go together, and a free society entails the abolition of both. In the early works of Karl Marx, the social interaction and ideas of man and society, the concept of human nature and human alienation or human needs are central concepts. In contrast, in the later works of Karl Marx, analysis of economic and social structures predominates. Habermas, in his book published in 1972, had separated the analysis of economic production and of social interaction or communication, social interaction or social communication as a distinct area of investigation. In other words, he is trying to say that in the writings of Karl Marx, there are two different areas of investigation of the capitalist society which should be understood separately. This is the position of Habermas, one of the noted thinkers in the Marxist school of social thought. On the other hand, we have two other writers who are not less important than Habermas, and we must know what is their view of early Marx and later Marx, or the running theme in the Marxist thought, represented by the economic and philosophical manuscript of 1844 on the one hand and Capital Volume 1 on the other. We have seen that Habermas thinks that these two books should be understood separately because their object of study are two different areas of investigation. In contrast to Habermas, Louis Althusser, the structural Marxist, wrote in 1969, almost 3 years before Habermas's analysis, that there is a radical break between the 1844 manuscripts and the Capital. Therefore, you can see that Habermas is not articulating something new. Rather, he is endorsing the view expressed by Louis Althusser in 1969. As a result, we have two schools of Marxist thought about the writings of early Marx, whose major writing in the early period is economic and philosophical manuscript of 1844, and in the writings of later Marx, which is primarily represented by capital volume 1 of 1876. In the English translation of the 3 volumes of Capital, noted Marxist scholar McLennan had written in 1971 that he does not agree with Althusser that there is a radical break between the 1844 manuscript as well as the Capital. He, asserts emphatically, McLennan asserts emphatically that there is a continuity between the early Marx and later Marx, and it is not academic honesty to consider the two writings, the early writings and the later writings, separately. In case I have to give my own opinion, I think that there is both continuity as well as change in the writings of early Marx and later Marx. And we can see this, that is both continuity and change, under the following points. Number 1, the continuity lies in the connection between the theory of alienation. And number 2, it also lies in the theory of commodity fetishism. Number 3, the development, that is the departure, lies in the way that the theory of commodity fetishism comes to form the basis for the development of Marx's economic theory and his structural analysis of society. Number 4, the notion of commodity fetishism is very close to the analysis of the alienation of the product of labor. Number 5, Marx in his later works is concerned less with the alienation of labor into its product than with the alienation of social relationships in the division of labor into market relationship between commodities. Unlike the first 4 points, it requires a little more attention. Therefore, I am reading out the 5th point again so that you understand the clear distinction between the earlier works and later works. Please pay your attention to the sentence from one commentator, Jan Krab. Jan Krab says that Marx, in his later works, is concerned less with the alienation of labor into its product. In other words, in earlier works, for example, the economic and philosophical manuscript of 1844, Marx was primarily concerned with alienation of human labor from its product. In other words, the earlier works were concerned with alienation of human beings as worker in the capitalist market in two senses. Number one, they had no control over the means of production. Secondly, they were not making any product independently. Therefore, they could not claim that they are making one full product through their labor, even if with the aid of the machine. The complex division of labor had made their work meaningless. Their work is not giving any meaning to them because it is not the product of their inner urge or inner calling. In other words, they were not working for themselves, rather they were working for wage labor. Therefore, they were working as a machine for others, those who owned the factory or the means of production, and they were reduced to a non-human condition out of this alienation from their work as human being as well as the product of their labor in the market. Whereas in the later writings, theory of alienation remains in vogue, but the emphasis of this theory has radically changed. Now, the focus is not so much on the alienated worker or laborer or alienated man or the person. Rather, the emphasis is more on the alienated relationship between two laborers who are engaged in a tiny job to produce a full product through a complicated division of labor. In other words, in the later writings, the theory of alienation is applied or extended to the alienation of social relationships in the division of labor into market relationship between commodities. In other words, in later writings, there are two types of alienation. The alienation of two commodities being produced in the market through division of labor. And it becomes terribly important in exchange value of the goods or the products. Marx discusses about two concepts of value, that is price, the use value and the exchange value. Now, what is use value? For example, almost the same amount of labor is invested in the production of bread on the one hand and wine on the other, or perfume on the third. Therefore, the use value or the standard price of the wine and the bread and perfume should be one according to use value, because the same amount of labor time has been consumed in the production of the three goods. But in the market, what happens that although the three types of workers in the factory of making breads, making wine, and making perfume are spending 8 hours, or Marx was talking about 12 hours. 8 hours per day. The three workers in three factories are working. But the price in the market or the exchange value of the three goods, breads, wines, and perfumes, are not the same. Therefore, there is a second type of alienation, that the producers of bread and the producers of wine and the producers of perfume represent. All the three workers are alienated. And instead of horizontal values, the exchange value of bread, wine, and perfume is vertical. What is horizontal? This is horizontal. 1, 2, 3. And this is vertical. 1, 2, 3. This is upper class, this is middle class, this is lower class. The bread comes within the lower class of commodity. The wine comes in the middle class of the commodity, and the perfume comes in the upper class of commodity. Therefore, there are two types of stratification of human beings into the labor class, the middle class, and the upper class. Simultaneously, there are another type of classification among the goods. The essential goods, which is necessary for livelihood, then goods which provide comfort, and then third, the goods which are a representation of luxury. Number 6, a commodity is a mysterious thing according to Karl Marx. I am reading out in direct narration. From Capital, Volume 1, published in 1867. I am sorry, earlier I said 1876. I was referring to Capital Volume 1, which was produced in 1867 and not 1876, as I said earlier. That was slip of tongue. I am quoting from page 76, and we are quoting from this page, and it makes 3 points, rather 4, 6, 7, 8, and 9. First, 6 point, a commodity is a mysterious thing. In it, the social character of man's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of labor. I am reading out again. A commodity, according to Marx, is a mysterious thing. In it, that is, in commodity, the social character of man's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of labor. Point 7. The relation of the producers to the sum total of their own labor is presented to them as a social relation existing not between themselves but between the products of their labor. This is why the products of labor becomes commodities. Number 8. Commodities are social things. As you remember, Immanuel Durkheim, social facts are things. We find the same language here. Commodities produced by the modern worker in the factory are social things whose qualities are at the same time perceptible and imperceptible by the senses or the sense organs. Point 9. There is a definite social relation between men that assumes in their eyes the fantastic form of a relationship between things. This is fetishism. This is fetishism, Fetishism, which attaches itself to the products of labor so soon as they are produced as commodities. Now, point 10. The division of labor is the way in which society divides up its workforce to produce the necessities and the luxuries of life, creates social relationships between groups of people. Number 11, the division of labor. In the division of labor, human beings are related to each other as well as dependent on each other, even if they never set eyes on each other. This is very similar to what Durkheim had said. However, 12th point, most people do not experience this relationship as social relationship. However, most people do not experience this relationship as a social relationship. Now read the 2 points together and it becomes clear, point 11 and point 12. Come to point 13. Rather, human beings experience it as a relationship between commodities that they produce. Number 14, and this is a concept you should pay a little more attention. Marx is discussing about his notion of the market. Marx says that the market is endowed with human powers. And this is not the view of Karl Marx about the market. This is analysis of the market which was developing when Marx was writing Capital Volume 1, that is around 1860s, because the book was published in 1867. Therefore, it is based on his analysis of the market which was developing around 1860s. Marx said that the people usually say like this, in inverted comma, let the market decide, or let the free market economy work. Now I am reading out the full sentence. The market is endowed with human powers by the advocates of the market economy, who also claim to be the champion of liberal democracy. Marx says that it is not uncommon to find such sentences. Let the market decide in the free market economy and liberal democratic societies. Number 15. They talk about the free market as if it had powers of thought and judgment. This is a sarcastic remark of Karl Marx about the advocates of the free market economy and the free market ideology. Marx said sarcastically about free market as if it had powers of thought and judgment. Marx is, criticizing the votaries of free market. How can market decide? Because it is a brute force. It has neither the power of thinking nor the power of judging. Market had no powers of thought and judgment, therefore market cannot decide on its own. At best it is a metaphor, at best it is a good advertisement, at best it is, election slogan. Now, I think you have understood what Marx wants to say about the free market ideology. He said that the advocates of free market and capitalist mode of production knowingly or unknowingly have invested enormous powers in the market, and it shows that even the advocates of free market and capitalist mode of production are alienated people. They do not understand what they are advocating. Sarcastically, Marx is implicitly saying, it is sarcastic but implicit, that the advocates of free market economy are as alienated as the workers themselves, because in advocating the market economy and the capitalist mode of production, they are giving, the powers of thought and powers of judgment to the market and stretching this right for the human beings, whether they are academicians supporting this mode of production or whether they are the workers who are selling their manual labor. Therefore, C. Wright Mills talks about three types of labor: manual labor, mental labor, and sexual labor. All three are available in the market, and no value or no sentiment is attached with it, because market has become sovereign. Market has become sui generis, and society has become dependent upon it. Society is fragmented. Sometimes the market will dictate or it will demand. It will move in different directions, but usually up and down in vertical directions. Point 16. We are led to believe that our livelihood depends on this invisible, powerful, thoughtful entity which nobody has seen but which everybody assumes to be real. He is talking about the market. He is talking about the condition of human beings in the capitalist mode of production and the market economy. Marx is asserting that we are led to believe that our livelihood depends on this invisible, powerful, thoughtful entity which nobody had seen but which everybody assumes to be real. We are not even expected to have faith in it. It is simply there, and our newspapers write about it every day. During the times of Marx, there was no television, no internet. Only newspaper represented public sphere. And yes, there were periodicals and magazines and journals. Point 17. Adam Smith had mentioned about the hidden hand of the market. It seems to be mystically invested with all the powers of the separate individuals and groups that make it up, and at the same time seems to control each of them. Each of them has to react to the market. Now let us conclude the view of Karl Marx about power. Marx says that only non-alienated human being had power. Alienated human beings have no power. This is his first position. His second position is that those who own the means of production have power. And those who do not own the means of production, they do not have power. In other words, Marx is trying to say that there is a fixed amount of power in the market or in the capitalist society, and A had power at the cost of B, C, D, E or F. In other words, Marx, like Max Weber, had a concept of power as a zero-sum game. What is zero-sum game? That there is a fixed amount of power in the market or society. For example, there is 100 units of power in the market or society. Now, in case there are 100 people in the market or society, there are two people, one who owns or who controls 60% of power, and the other who controls 40% of power. Then the rest will have no power at all. This concept of power is widely prevalent in social sciences until 1940s. Therefore, everybody believed that power is a capacity to have his or her, that is the powerful, his or her, work done. How? Suppose there is a owner of the factory in a democratic society, and the laborers are demanding a higher wage, and they are threatening that either you increase our wage or we will go on a strike. Now, in case the workers are able to mobilize the society at large in their favor, then in a democratic society, the laborer or the labor union will have the power to bargain their wage with the owner of the factory. On the other hand, if the owner of the factory is able to alienate the workers from the wider society by using his manipulative power, because they own capital, then they will force the workers to resume work in the factory by breaking their proposed indefinite strike. Tomorrow, we will first discuss the Weberian notion of power and contrast it with the Marxist notion of power by bringing in the concept of authority and status in addition to power. Thank you, friends.